Welcome Rory Lamont of Hitachi Rail to the Procurement Head's big interview series. It's a pleasure having you.
Thanks, it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Then, how did you get into procurement?
I was lucky enough to come into procurement almost by accident. I applied for BP's graduate scheme in 1999 and was lucky enough to join the procurement team in the North Sea. At that time the North Sea was absolutely booming, and it was a very lucky first choice of kind of my first step in the career ladder. I'd done some procurement, I'd done a procurement elective at university as part of my honours year and really loved it. And I think my passion for it's grown from there. I love the supplier interface, I love working with the business, I love the technical interface, and now I'm lucky enough to find myself in the customer interface as well. So it's a great career, absolutely fabulous place to be.
What are you most passionate about when it comes to procurement?
At the moment, there's some couple of things that really got me charged up. The Scope 3 emissions piece around sustainability is the kind of the next area that this function doesn't need to solve itself. It's got to lead its businesses to help understand and then form the plan on how we work with the supply chain to improve and remove carbon as we go forward. So I love that. When I start to look into our supply base, we have about 12,000 suppliers, everything from the FM supplier here for our office in London to the engine supplier that I met yesterday, who are looking at batteries. The challenges there are very different, but the procurement team has a massive role to play to make sure that we understand what the opportunities are and make sure we get after those opportunities. That's one piece. I think the other piece for me that I love is the fact that I get to go into factories, to get to walk the line, to see how our goods and services are coming together, to do the first article inspection. There's just such a range of things you can get involved in this profession. That's why I love it. That's why I'm here.
What are the challenges that you and your team are currently facing?
I think some of the common challenges that any supply chain team in a manufacturing business are going to be faced with. So we're still making sure that our operations are COVID safe. We're still making sure that our supply chains are managing COVID, and then making sure where we have got incidents that we need to help the supply chain with, that we do that we communicate that to our manufacturing locations and ultimately to our customers. So that kind of backwards and forwards is very real just now. Brexit is still there, okay? Sort of Brexit Mark II, the second version of it is around us. New HMRC obligations which came into force in January. We're now in anger using the processes and tools that we put in place about 18 months ago to deal with that.
And just a quick follow-up on that question. It's quite something that's quite dear to my heart in terms of the getting materials, etc., through the customs process, etc. Did you have to change quite a lot?
Yeah, we really took a lot. We took a long look at that because the legacy of the rail business unit. We grew up in Japan, right? So we were building, the high-speed Shinkansen for the first Tokyo Olympics in '64. That's really, before that we were building locomotives, but for the domestic market. And HS1, which was our first UK project for the Olympics in 2012, a lot of the componentry was coming from Japan. And even with the new fleets that we have in operation in the UK, we still have a long supply chain for some systems going back to Japan. And so with that reliance in the business, we took a long look at which routes do we bring goods and services in from, and we took a very deliberate strategy to avoid Dover and the Kent corridor. We're lucky in that our factory is in County Durham, and a lot of our kind of operational hubs are up and down the country, so coming in through a different angle was a different port was an opportunity for us. And we also took the opportunity to find some bonded warehouses, which meant we could bypass the port congestion and do the customs clearance within our own or within third-party facilities. We did that. Then, of course, we didn't have to do a lot of the clearance procedures on the border because they weren't there. So we've built up the team, we've put in place the teams, the systems, the processes, and now the customs checks that we need to do. So it's been a long piece of work, 30 months of work, but it's paid dividends.
I guess, what are your team doing currently, and what's the organisation doing currently with regard regards to that sustainability piece?
We've been really public on where we want to be, right? So carbon neutral by 2050, right, across the Hitachi group, and we're acting on that now. So we reduced our CO2 footprint by 30% last year. We've increased the reuse of water, and we've reduced the energy intensity of our facilities, all of which is in the report we just published. The role that my team are playing is very much to look at Scope 3. Okay, so within the organisation of a CSR committee, which has our COOs on it, myself, CHRO, and the head of sustainability and environment. And across that group, we have working groups sitting underneath. And one of those working groups is on Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So my supplier management team, we've been working quite closely with EcoVadis. We talked a lot about that publicly. And we're at the point of taking through our top 250 suppliers through the EcoVadis registration process. So if any of my suppliers are watching this, it's really important that you do that, because it helps to give us the insight to how you're performing. The next step after that is to have the heat map of the supply chain. Okay, so my philosophy here is I'm pretty comfortable that many of my suppliers are engaged on this topic already. Okay, so they're actively managing their Scope 1 and the Scope 2 emissions. So that helps me, because my supplier Scope 1 and 2 are my Scope 3. But ultimately where I'm going to get to in the next 6 months is to know where the hotspots are, and to know in detail where the hotspots are. So my guts tell me I'm making a train from aluminium. The extraction and refining of aluminium is going to be a challenge that we have to take on. And the question is, am I going to take that on as Hitachi on its own? Am I going to look to do it as a rail industry initiative, which I'm talking a little bit with Network Rail, that might be something to look at? Or do I want to approach Boeing and Airbus, because they have the same, they all have aluminium tubes, they just happen to make airplanes from them, and I make trains. So that's where we're going on that. And I think the really positive thing is there's some great technology out there that really can make you take big jumps quickly and quite effectively. And the view I have is the more the supply chain engages in that, the more transparent we all are, the quicker we get to solving the really difficult challenges, whilst just the shift that's happening in society in general help us address a lot of the easier to get carbon intensive processes that we have around us, like lighting, like energy.
What's the biggest risk you've taken?
Taken a couple, actually. I think luckily they've all paid off. One was leaving BP to join Accenture. So I left a very stable business environment in the north, based in Aberdeen, global travel, and came out from that into Accenture after, I think I've probably been with BP about 5 years, and the change was huge. So I went from being part of a business to being in an advisory role, having to help sell, having to really work as part of big integrated teams, and that was a big shift from where I'd been. And I think I was probably a bit naive and didn't fully understand the shift I was making. So for anybody that's kind of new or making a second or third job move, really just take a minute and think about what does it mean, not just for my job and not for my future career, but for my personal life. And what does it mean, where am I going to be in 3 years after having taken this risk, and what am I getting out of it? I was really lucky that I got some great skills out of that time with Accenture, learn how to take data, present it, talk to people, plan, manage, which I probably would have got, but it would have taken me longer, so I think that came back quite well. And then the second one is the shift out of oil and gas and into rail, and again it was a big personal challenge to move from one heavy engineering environment to another, but a really big change in product. Very few people phone you up and say, I've just had a great litre of petrol, thank you very much. I have had suppliers phone me up and say, I've just come off one of your new trains, it's amazing. And I think the shift into rail's given me that kind of real link to a product that I've invested in. And again, it's been a great personal challenge to move into the CPO role for the first time, take on a big function, global responsibility, and I've really enjoyed it.
What do you think are the current procurement trends, hot topics, and what emerging roles do you think we'll see in procurement as a result?
I think the CPO role is shifting really quickly, right? Two things: pandemic, Brexit. There's been so much more emphasis on what's happening in the supply chain, and I think many CEOs are now looking at the CPO or Chief Supply Chain Officer role and thinking, yep, I can see the value there. I can see the risk protection. I can see the risk mitigation that this part of my function does. We're going to go into we're in an inflationary cycle, so there's still the P&L protection that the function's always offered, but I think we need to offer it in a much more integrated way, right? So I talked a bit about sustainability. Can we drive a more efficient, effective infrastructure within the business and therefore reduce our exposure to energy? The supplier management role is becoming more and more important, and it's knitting together, what's the supply base we want to be using, what's the performance of that supply base, how do I keep that supply base qualified, with understanding what's the environmental impact of that supply chain, how do we link together what engineering needs and what the customer needs and what the supply base can do. And I think the data that can generate now is becoming really, really important. I don't think it's really acceptable anymore to not understand where your supply chain is or isn't performing on the kind of ethical point, the financial point, and then the actual business delivery point, and that all comes together in that supply management role.
Talking about the trends and hot topics within procurement, something I've seen a lot more recently is social value.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
A lot of businesses are wrestling with that. What's not just the return to the shareholder or the stakeholder, but also return back to our environment or our society. For us as a function, then, if that's something our business is wrestling with, we'd better be trying to understand what the market and our supply chains think about that. I'm not sure we're really getting to the bottom of that yet. And I think a lot of the shifts you see around the business models, acquisitions that are happening is because a lot of companies are really oscillating around where to go with that one. So, one to watch.
What skills do you consider essential to be a procurement leader?
Great question. I actually did a careers evening at my son's school on Monday this week, and somebody asked me exactly that question, a really bright 17-year-old, which was pretty scary. At the top of the function, there was a great Harvard Business Review article called the T-shaped leader, right? So it's a leader with deep functional capability, but with the ability to reach across to all the other functions, right? So, as a CPO or a procurement director, you've got to be able to talk really, in a linked up way with your CFO and your CEO, right? You need to be able to understand the CHRO's agenda, and you must be able to be absolutely intimate with the Chief Supply Chain Officer, if you have one, and this Chief Operating Officer, if that's how your business is set up. So that ability to represent your function but understand the key principles of all the other functions around your business are absolutely essential. If I was to step kind of to the absolute other end of the spectrum, the new talent that are coming into the function, I see really strong commercial skills, some great kind of almost business analyst type skills coming up and into the category management and sourcing space. And the people I see succeeding there come with great interpersonal skills and a comfort to go and talk to an engineer, knowing that they might not have an engineering background, but they're still happy to talk to that engineer and listen. And that was the other bit of advice I gave to these kids, is like, if you're early in your career, get the ability to listen, the ability to synthesize it down and then come back with a couple of options and a recommendation. So that those great interpersonal skills, good EQ along with a nice IQ, is a great place to be.
Who had the most influence on your procurement
That's
career?
A great question.
And why?
So the first ever boss I had was a gentleman called Granville Clutterbuck in BP, and he was a great leader because he was very humble, right? He was really approachable. He shared his experiences very freely, but he had exceedingly high standards. And I can remember him, just taking me to task on stuff in a great way. Because you've really not thought about this. Could you go and think about it and come back? But he would also walk out at 3 o'clock and say, "Who wants a cup of tea?" and bring everybody a cup of tea and the tea. So he sticks in my memory very, very much. And I think some of some of the time in consulting, a couple of clients that really stick in my memory, and those clients were ones that decided to treat me as an individual as part of their team, despite the fact I was working with an external company. I think that's a really important skill as well, to know how to build a team from different parts that gives you something that's better than the sum of those individual parts. That's a key skill as well.
What role have you and the procurement function played in enabling the company to face the pandemic?
So obviously the main focus was sustaining the supply chain. So we started off using some pretty good analysis we had through one of our spend analysis tools. So we took the supplier master data file and correlated it against the instances of COVID cases recorded by, I think it's a John Hopkins hospital. That gave us a really good first sort of cut of where are our supply chains most impacted, and it was a very powerful picture to show to the executive team. So we were reporting kind of a 96% correlation between where our suppliers are based and where the cases of COVID were emerging, and that really got the focus of the business that we needed to be paying attention to our suppliers. From there we went into simple tracking, so key suppliers to key projects. Are they sustaining operations? Are they seeing tier 1 and tier 2 disruptions below them? And we started to report that on a regular basis, along with the mitigation plans we put in place. So pretty core really, when you're trying to manufacture trains, which I'm really proud that we continued to do during the pandemic, when a lot of our manufacturing base is in Italy, so where things emerged first of all, so we did a really great job to be able to maintain the manufacture and the operation of our trains throughout. We played a role in obviously getting the PPE we needed, and we continue to play a role to make sure that as things shift around us, we're on top of where we've got supply risk and where we don't. Personally, it was pretty difficult 2 years. I ended up from being in Japan almost once a month, once every 6 weeks, to not being on an airplane for 2 years, running a global team from my spare room in the west of London, which was not at all the way I was doing it before. It was a really difficult period, and I think everybody, I hope, has come through it having learnt a lot about how to operate globally remotely, but I'm really looking forward to not having to operate remotely globally anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. With that in mind, what impact has it had on the organisation?
Yeah, I think our organisation was 13,000 people, large number in Japan, large number in Italy, large number in the UK, and a team that's ever growing in the US. And we used to be together a lot, and we've not been together as much as we would like to have been. And I think that's led to some of the global thinking slowing down, right? And we need to get back into that, because that's really, it's a global business we're in, and we've got to get back to that. It's meant the opportunities to move around for our talent and for our teams hasn't been there. And again, I think everybody's dying to get back to that. We had an opening party this week for the UK office, kind of to welcome everybody back. And as a leadership team, we're really committed to doing more of that. So as we emerge out, we're ready to get going again.
What has worked well, and what would you do differently with the benefit of hindsight?
We were rightfully really cautious about coming back to the office, and I think with the benefit of hindsight, I might have led slightly differently, and I might have said, actually guys, we really just need to get into the office for this one task. So as the government restrictions calmed down, the office was open, but we were still quite hesitant to come together. And some of the things we've been really clear on, the planning and performance review is not something you can do by Zoom, right? So we've been getting the team together in Italy, in Japan and in the UK, and then joining them up with the technology we've now got. We've got to keep that going, and we've got to grow that. We're just finishing budgeting for this year. We're in the middle of planning, and again, we're hopefully all going to find time to get together in Italy to go through that kind of fine review. But that's been a really big miss. Managing a supply chain when you can't go to your suppliers is very hard. Yeah, and you have to rely a lot on trust, a lot on being able to ask the right questions, being able to get the right data. And I think the availability of data in the supply chain has been quite clear that that's not been as well advanced as we'd liked it to have been. But there's also been some big strides made in that area because of the pandemic. So
What does equality, diversity and inclusion mean to you?
That's a really hard question, and I've seen loads of very good academic answers on it. I think when I wrestle with it myself, it comes down to really three key things. One is a team that is made up of different points of view, okay? A team that listens to those different points of view and is trained to do the listening, but then that forms an opinion and executes executes the plan rather. And that for me is what true diversity and inclusion is really founded around. Then there's the kind of lenses you can put on that around sex, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and those are equally as important. But I think the benefit of looking at it through that lens of have I got diverse opinions and experience around this table? Is the table listening to itself, pushing itself, and then forming a plan and getting after it is where the power of that diversity comes from for the benefit of the business. You know, I'm lucky in that my leadership team has got, you know, different nationalities, it's got different types of experiences. It probably doesn't have the gender mix that I would like to see, and I think if you were to look at it, that might be a source of criticism. But as a leader of that team, I've sat back and thought, have I got the difference experience? Does the team listen to itself? Does it form its plan and does it execute? And I'm happy to defend that position because I see it coming through and I see the benefit of it for the business.
Excellent. My next question was going to be, how important is it to you? It's obviously relatively important.
I think it's really important, and it's important to me for a couple of personal reasons. You know, I was really good at fencing as a kid. You know, fenced for Great Britain, fenced all over the world, but I fenced at a school that was a rugby school, and I didn't get the same credit for what I achieved in fencing because everybody thought rugby was the best thing since sliced bread. And that's what fuels my passion around diversity. You know, I'm really involved in coaching via the Outstanding organisation to make sure LGBTQ+ individuals have a chance, if you like, or are helped to feel comfortable in what is a predominantly biased environment for them. And I think that as leaders, if we're not doing that, if we're not helping bring in different cultures, different points of view, we're stifling our organisation. So that, you know, that's why I'm passionate about it from a background, and that's what I'm doing about it now.
Do you think your ED&I approach has changed at all as a result of the pandemic?
I think it's really suffered, if I'm honest, because you know, if you subscribe to my view around it's about bringing people with different views together and being able to generate ideas and plans, that's been hard, right? And we can see that that's coming back now because we're in the office more, and I'm really keen to encourage it and bring it forward again. So it will come back, but it's going to need more work from us.
From a culture perspective,
yeah,
it's more of a struggle now.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, that's one of the great things about Hitachi. You know, we've got this cultural mix of Japanese, European, American. It's a really heady mix, right? And one of the great challenges of my job is how do you harness that mix to get the business results we need.
How do you engage your key stakeholders around sustainability?
It's a conversation we're right in the middle of, and there's a couple of different areas it needs to come from. So, you know, we talked about the sustainability of our own operations. So clearly we're talking to plant managers about what are the solutions to, you know, giving you green energy. And so we've just signed a green energy contract for the UK with Scottish Power. That's been quite, you know, in the press as we went to COP26. We have the different conversation with the sales team. You know, so what's the requests from our customers? You know, they want a more and more recyclable train. They want an energy efficient train. They want a train that generates much less noise. So we need to then take those requirements, work with engineering, look to the market to find solutions to those problems. And then, you know, we've got this kind of vision of being a mobility company rather than a train, signalling and maintenance company. So how are we going to create that new product that means we can bring a mobility solution to cities that goes from ticketing to signalling to transportation to updates to your phone, ticketing on your phone. So there's a lot to it, and I think really it's about going to different stakeholders, listening to their needs. It's classic procurement stuff. Bring it back, see what the market can do. Can the market do it? No. Do we have to do it ourselves? Yeah. Do we need to go and partner with another company in a JV? Getting into those conversations.
And how are you measuring the success of your sustainability program?
So we've set out some really clear targets around energy, water, waste, and we're managing that on a yearly basis. We publish the results on those. And then for me, within the supply chain, the measures I've got just now are around how much of my suppliers by spend do I understand the Scope 3 emissions of. So the target I have is this year to understand 70% of my spend base of what their position is on Scope 3 emissions. And I think next year that will move to probably 85% of spend and clear action plans on the hotspots that I talked about earlier on.
And has there been anything you would have done differently with the benefit of hindsight?
I think with the benefit of hindsight, I've got into conversations within the rail industry and within parallel industries more quickly, because I think I could have picked up a lot of learning. And what I'm finding more and more is suppliers and competitors are really happy to share on this topic because it benefits us all. It's almost a right to play rather than a competitive advantage, I think. And I'd be really keen, to talk to more companies about what we're doing and to learn from more companies on this topic.
Are you aware of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge?
I am, yep. I am.
Good. And what does that mean to you?
I think it's a useful construct, right? But me as the CPO for Hitachi Rail signing up to the procurement pledge must be followed up by action, okay? It's a hollow promise if that's all you do. And as a company, I think we're much more aligned to setting targets aligned to science-based measurement than potentially signing up to a procurement pledge. Okay, not that I don't believe in it, but we have our vehicle to drive change, which is the obligations of each CEO to have a plan in place and to show that that plan is delivering is much more powerful, I think, and much more directive to the whole organisation than me signing up to the procurement pledge. So I'm a big proponent of it, but for Hitachi Rail, we have the change directive that we need to move forward.
What are your visions for sustainability?
I'd be very proud if I could see the clear link between the different functions within the business pulling in one direction. Okay, and that's really, that's where I'd like to see us go as an organisation. I'd then be very, very encouraged to see the same level of dedication within the supply chain. And I'd really love to see the supply chain working down the tiers to help the smaller companies. So the biggest thing that keeps me awake at night is not the big, the big multinationals or nationals that we work with. It's when I go to the company making brackets for us in and around their factories, be that in the northeast or in Italy. And the challenge there is huge because they don't have the same resources that the larger companies do. They have an inordinate amount of pressure just to meet our requirements today. And actually, I think that's where we need to focus our help. And so my vision would be where we have taken many steps together and we're capable of sharing that as a supply chain to make sure that the lower layers can benefit from it and that the decarbonisation flows down and through the supply chain.
Okay. What changes have you seen in sustainability and what have you noticed of those changes over your entire procurement career?
Got a really clear memory of walking down a warehouse full of valves when I was up in the North Sea, and just the amount of paper, wood, pallets, packaging, the skips outside, and a lot of that was getting recycled. And now what I notice is that the packaging that we're seeing is much more thought through. So when we buy seats, they're coming in stillages. Those stillages, we empty the seats out and the stillages go back. Length of supply chain. I can see, I talked earlier on about some systems that come from Japan. The work we're thinking about now for some of the systems from Japan is repair and overhaul really needs to be done in country, right? It's good for the environment, it's good for our customers, it's good for the local economies we work with, right? And just seeing that grow is really where I'd love to see a much clearer picture. And I'm quite encouraged that that's the type of work that's now being taken on in the other levels in the organisation. It's not just a conceptual conversation around the top table.
What do you like doing in your spare time?
So as a father of two, I spend an inordinate amount of time moving children from one place to the next. I'm very much enjoying the Six Nations, which obviously started off with a great result last weekend, and I'm looking forward to many more as we go on. Cooking's a passion. I'm just trying to be a good dad and husband, so pretty much a full-time profession.
Excellent. Any favourite books, films, sports? Obviously rugby.
I think music is a big passion. I really enjoy Don Lett's podcast on a Sunday. That's a favourite one of mine to listen to on the tube. Films, what did I see recently? The Courier I saw recently, which a great Cold War thriller. So yeah.
Good stuff. And tell us an interesting fact about you.
So I actually left home when I was 17. So in Scotland, sort of halfway through my final year, went to live in France for 4 months. So got a very clear memory of leaving Waverley Station with my rucksack and making my way down to Portsmouth and then coming off the ferry from Portsmouth in Caen. So I spent 4 months living and kind of finding my way through life as a 17-year-old in France. That's quite a formative experience. So I've got a very dear memory of that.
Thank you very much, Rory, for being with me today, and it's been a pleasure. And thank you for your insight and your knowledge, and we hope you will have the best 2022.
Thanks very much. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.